Achieving a gorgeous grin from home isn't a total mystery with Bite Clear aligners. Just don't be surprised if all of your sleuthing friends start asking, "What's your secret?" Begin by ordering your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95. Bite Clear aligners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces. Plus, they offer flexible financing, accept eligible insurance, and you can pay with your HSA FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th.
We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
Each episode, our special guest will bring with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our special guest is writer-director Adam Egypt Mortimer. He co-wrote and directed Some Kind of Hate, contributed to the Holidays anthology film, and his sophomore feature, Daniel Isn't Real, debuted to acclaim late last year and made our Best of the Year list. You will be able to watch Daniel Isn't Real this Thursday, March 26th on Shudder. Welcome to the show, Adam.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We are so excited to have you because we love Daniel Isn't Real.
We did.
Thank you. That's awesome. I really appreciate that. Where did you guys see it when you saw it?
So I saw it as a screener on my computer. Sorry.
Well, I'll assume that you guys have like awesome TVs and good sound systems because you watch movies all the time. Maybe.
I have a nice TV. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's, as long as you're not telling me you watched it on your phone, then, we're all good.
No way. Terry got the soundtrack for me on vinyl for Christmas, so I listened to the vinyl.
Amazing.
So that's pretty cool.
He did such a good job. Yeah, the soundtrack was made by a electronic musician from England named Clark, who's kind of like a more contemporary sort of Aphex Twin type of guy, and this was his first soundtrack, and he did such a good job in the movie. And then when he made the record, he really sequenced it like it's very different than if you just kind of extract the music from the movie, and he made it into its own experience. And I just love it. Like when I first heard it as it was sequenced as a record, I was like, even if I wasn't involved with this movie, I would love this record. It's like, so he did such an insane job on that.
Yeah. And actually, I mean, Terry, do you mind if we talk about the soundtrack now?
Go right ahead. Free form.
Because I'm obsessed with the soundtrack, and it's just like, it's such a beautiful, combination of like electronic and kind of like beautiful dreamlike music, and then also terrifying string instruments. And I would just love to hear like what the collaboration was like between you and Clark to create this kind of dichotomy of sounds that feels like Daniel and Luke.
Yeah. I mean, so for those who haven't seen it, it's a movie about a kid's imaginary friend who comes back to him when he's a young man, and things are fun and exciting for a minute, and then they're manic, and then they're horrific. And so I was trying to think about like what is the right music for that whole vibe. And the thing that I landed on that I shared with Chris Clark was it should be like Bernard Herrmann, like the composer who did all of Hitchcock's movies and Taxi Driver, things like that, the most classic sense of like great thriller music. He had these big string orchestras. It's like, it should be like that, but it's fallen through some like horrific electronic threshing machine. And so, and that represents in a lot, it's like two different, it's like a duality. It's like this classic thing, but it's modern and horrific. And I wanted to capture this sense of like big paranoia that's in that music, and also just like the internal sound of madness. And so we talked about that a lot, and we talked about Requiem for a Dream and the way that the score in Requiem for a Dream just goes on and on and on and is like relentless and exciting and horrific all at the same time. So that was like the main conversation. And we started talking before we shot the movie. So he was even experimenting with music and sending it to us as we were going, as we were shooting, as we were just starting to edit. So we were really able to like build things around his sound, which was wonderful.
That's amazing. That's so cool. I love hearing about how directors work with composers. I'm not a musician, but I think like I really love soundtracks, especially horror soundtracks. So it's just cool to hear how it all came together, because it's just like the soundtrack is just such a good part of the movie. But now we can back up a little bit. We kind of just dove right in to the movie.
We just dive right in kind of people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, so kind of going back a little bit, because I let's stay on this music track for a minute. Because your first movie, Some Kind of Hate, I watched that for the first time this weekend. And I noticed a couple different like threads between that movie and your sophomore feature, Daniel Isn't Real, in terms of the music, whereas like Some Kind of Hate kind of had a metal influence to this. And like, I love your idea of what you're explaining with Daniel Isn't Real, with the kind of like going through kind of like an electronica thresher, because like it kind of gives me industrial vibes and reminded me of some of like the 90s industrial rock that I used to love and listen to. But you seem to have a musical connection to your work. Is that on accident, or is that purposeful?
Yeah, no, I'm definitely obsessed with music. I was a musician. I mean, I guess I could say I am still a musician, but before I became a filmmaker, I was devoted to being a musician. That was the thing that I was doing first. Oh, wow. And I was in a metal band a long time ago.
Oh, really?
I played guitar in a metal band. But then I sort of evolved from playing metal to playing really experimental music. Like I played the electric sitar, and I had like a metal box from the 50s that just buzzed, and I would run it through like 9 different effects pedals.
Oh my God, that sounds amazing.
When I would try to touch it to adjust the dials, I would get like a horrible electric shock, and I would like sing through a big plastic tube, and like I toured a little bit, and I sort of had this concept of this band that there was like a big UFO cult, and we were just the sort of musical outreach of the cult. Like that isn't actually true, but that was sort of the like the concept of what the band was. So yeah, I was always very into music, and then I gave up music like very consciously. I was like, I'm going to stop playing music and give away my musical instruments and focus on becoming a filmmaker, because I felt like it would be impossible to sort of do both all the time. You know what I mean? Like, so there was a certain point where I was like, you know what? I've had a nice time. Like, I recorded a couple of records. I went on some tours. This is super experimental, and I feel like I've done with it what I wanted to do. So I'm laying it down. I'm laying down the electric sitar, and I'm picking up the whatever you pick up when you become picking up a great big box of despair and becoming a filmmaker. So then when it came time to be able to, and then, you know, and I got my sort of real, I guess, career start as a filmmaker doing music videos, which obviously, you know, has a very intense connection to music and to thinking about how visuals go with music and cutting to the rhythm and things like that. So I think that's always deeply informed what I do. And then the thing that has been so nice in finding partnership with Spectre Vision, who produced Daniel Isn't Real, and they're also the people who produced Mandy and Color Out of Space and Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. It's Elijah Wood's company. They are super into music. Like, they obsess about music. And so when we started talking about who was going to compose, who was going to do the score, what's the score going to be like for Daniel, they were really on top of it, and they suggested Chris Clark to me, and Daniel Noah specifically at that company like worked very closely with me and with the composer to, you know, make it good. So yeah, so I guess music music is my life, man. It's funny. So having given up on music for a very long time, it's something that for years and years and years, I was always like, well, I'm trying to become a filmmaker and this is really hard. It's a really difficult life. And how do you get a movie made? I kind of wish I was just hanging out playing my guitar sometimes, but I didn't. I had gotten rid of it. But then when I was working on Daniel, I was like, you know what? I think I'm finally a professional filmmaker. I really feel like I can finally feel like I'm a professional filmmaker. And then inspired by hanging out with Chris, who was doing the music, I bought like a cheap $99 MIDI keyboard. And so I would come home from editing Daniel and get a little bit high and record music, which is like what I was doing for the first time in like a really long while. And by the end of Daniel, I had recorded about like an album, like a concept album that I'm planning to release maybe later this year.
So cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I was like, I gave up on music because I was like, I don't want to have hobbies. I need to dedicate myself to making movies. But then once I really felt like I was making movies, I picked up the hobby again of making music, I guess. So that's been my music trajectory. And yep,
cool.
That's the trajectory.
So what about the horror trajectory? Like, where did that start? Like a love of horror and wanting to, just watch horror and be in the horror community? Like, where did that start?
Yeah, it's like as far back in my memories as I can remember. I'm sure it's the same with you guys too, right? It's like,
yeah.
I like, I mean, it's funny because even in the concept of what your show is, Mary Beth, when you were like, what's a movie that traumatized you? I had to sort of, I feel like I structured when I think about my life being interested in movies, it's kind of structured around a thing that traumatized me. So, like I have this memory of seeing an animated Raggedy Ann and Andy movie.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen it since I must have been like possibly pre-linguistic when I saw it, but it was fucking horrifying. When you're tiny. So that was like my first memory of a movie is something that really frightened me. And then my next memory is seeing Watership Down, which I'm still not over that one. Like I'm still totally ruined by that movie. I mean, for people who haven't seen Watership Down, it's essentially an apocalyptic animated rabbit movie. So you think like, oh, throw this on for the kids. He'll like it. And it's got like a scene where the rabbit warren is bulldozed and they're all just like screaming and swimming through tunnels of rabbit blood.
It's
and like,
absolutely terrible. Like my fifth grade teacher put that on in class and was like, it's a good movie to watch like when it's raining and you can't go to recess. Meanwhile, I was watching this rabbit get stuck in a snare and it's like choking on its own blood and everyone is like watching him die. And I was like, what is this fucking movie? This is horrible.
And they're on their way to find... Oh my God, you have to see. I mean, it really is like the most horrifying movie.
It is awful.
There's a character, one of the main characters is like a psychic, and he knows that an apocalypse is going to happen to the Warren, and nobody believes him, and he's just trying to round up like the rabbits so they can leave. And there's a black rabbit of death, this like sort of horrific spirit of death that comes and collects them when they die, and they find a warren of rabbits who are like a fascist dictatorship rabbit warren, where if you do something against the leader, they rip your ears off. I mean,
I forgot about that part.
You successfly blocked it out, and I apologize for bringing it to the surface. But if I have to suffer, you have to suffer. And then I have another, and then probably the movie that next. I mean, at a certain point, I saw Star Wars and whatever funny movies that I loved too, but just sort of marking things that horrified me. American Werewolf in London was a movie that I saw when I was very young that I couldn't even get through because just the first third or half of it ruined me for life. Are you guys? Are you familiar with American Werewolf in London?
Oh yeah.
Have you seen this movie? Yeah.
Yeah,
So like
I love that
the
movie.
dream sequence where the like Nazi pig demons come in and machine gun his family. Like, what the fuck is that? What is happening? So, so I guess it's like the groundwork had been laid. I was like, oh, entertainment is like a horrifically violent, traumatizing experience. Okay, cool. I guess I'll seek that out for the rest of my life. So,
Yep.
At a certain point,
Wow.
in that journey, I was like a hardcore Fangoria fan, and I was going to I won a costume contest at a Fangoria convention in Boston one year when I was a kid, the juniors division of the costume
What was
contest.
your costume?
My costume was Jason from Friday the 13th, part 72. So
Wow.
I did kind of like a really long white beard and some like old man wrinkly arm makeup and the hockey mask and a big knife, but I also had like a walking stick and I like hobbled up to the stage.
That
my
is
concept.
very good.
That is amazing. That definitely should win.
Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, and I was, I at a certain point when I was a kid, my mother knitted me a Freddy Krueger sweater.
Hell yeah.
Which was a true expression of both love and acceptance of who I was.
Absolutely. So did your family nurture your horror movie obsession?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I got very into special effects makeup for a while, like around the time I was probably in like middle school or something. And I found there's this amazing book written by Tom Savini that's about both sort of his life and all of the effects he did. And, he did the Friday the 13th movies and the Dawn of the Dead movies. And, he is like a super genius at ripping people apart on film. He did Creepshow. And he's also, what's fascinating about him was that he was a Vietnam vet. He was a photographer, like an infantry photographer. So he was constantly up close to like really horrible, violent things, which clearly influenced his entire life and career and how good his career is, but probably also, clearly harmed him in a lot of ways. But I was super obsessed with him and his work. And every time friends of mine came over, I would cast their face in plaster and then make like a latex thing. Like my friends would come over, I would dress them up like zombies and we would go out and stop cars in like full zombie regalia. Like,
oh my God.
I think when I was younger than that, I would disappear into my room and then just like come out as some character. So, like creature, the vampire, and kind of show it to my parents. I was like, here's what I am today, and kind of like act like that character for a while. They were very entertained. God bless them. So yeah, that was like.
Did you have any siblings?
Oh no! Does that sound like somebody with siblings? No.
Okay, I didn't want to word it that way. I was going to be like, were you an only child? Because that sounds accusatory. But like, it was a thought. But I needed to ask it in a diplomatic way.
I was in my own world, which is coming in really handy now that we're in quarantine. Let me tell you, this is nothing new for me.
Less people to check in on, but also,
yeah. So horror was always there, and then for a while it went away. Like around the time when I was doing like music video, when I kind of got into a filmmaking career, that's not what I was doing right off the bat. But then I kept thinking about, I had the opportunity to do these horror short films around the time I was making music videos, and I was able to I had this sense of combining like experimentalism with horrific, nightmarish imagery, and that really charged me up and sort of set me on a path. And then I started working towards being able to make horror movies specifically. And then magically, like that, it happened.
So it sounds kind of like you kind of always wanted to be involved with film in some way, from working on like the makeup in effects and like going on to like making those short films. Is that something you'd always wanted to do then?
Yeah, it was something I was always really interested in. Yeah, but I think there's a weird. It's interesting because now that I'm so committed to it and in the middle of it and sort of in the middle of a career of it, looking back on it, it was such a jagged, broken, winding road. Like I didn't go to film school, so I wasn't, at the age when you're sort of supposed to be going, what am I going to be? Like I didn't know, and for some reason I couldn't commit to it enough, and I wasn't sure. I just like there was. I think I had a sort of depressive like inability to grasp like I have to choose one thing and become that thing, because the sense of that felt like daunting and limiting, and weird or like I was above it or something. I don't know. Can you relate to that vibe? It's like I don't know what to, like, I like this and I like that. And like, how do I decide? I don't know. Like, and then you'd sort of imagine going down a path and like, is that it? Then I'm just going to do that. And then I'm going to die. And that's my whole life. Like,
Shut up. That's my everyday.
That is my everyday.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I was hoping you would say that you can relate. I'm over here like, wait, does anybody know what the fuck I'm talking about?
Well, it's like that weird thing where it's like, especially because like Terry and I both have full-time jobs that aren't related to horror film, and like horror is our passion. And it's just like weird. I feel like, not to speak for Terry, but like for myself, it was like this weird thing where it's like, I like making money, having like a salary, but I also like really want to do what stimulates me creatively and makes me happy. And it's this like weird thing.
Yeah. Like, I mean, we kind of talked a little bit about my job, but it's before we start recording, but like, it's not exactly the most creative job. It's very analytical in some cases. And I just found myself wanting more, which is why I started my website a couple years ago, because I needed this outlet to do something that was like feeding that side of my brain. And I can definitely feel that kind of like that pull of what is it that I really want to do almost every day.
Yeah, I think it's, and maybe it's okay to feel that way. I think this is the big thing that I'm getting at in my life now, is that like all of the time that you spend wondering if it's okay to feel the way that you feel is the thing that's the problem. Like wondering what you should do and not knowing and not committing and then splitting in two different, like that's all totally cool, but beating yourself up about it is the part that sucks.
Yeah.
And I think the next phase of my life that I got into when I did super commit to being a filmmaker, and it took so long before I could make a movie, on the timetable of years and years and years and years, where you're kind of like not making a lot of money because you've really tried to make this specific choice, but it's not happening. And like, I mean, the amount of times where I would start to convince myself like, oh, I'm dying of cancer right now, and I will never have lived up to my potential, and I will never have shared the thing that I feel like I'd be good at. Like those feelings are so bad for you. And looking back on it now, I can be like, it took me 8 years to make Daniel Isn't Real, and it was totally worth it. And it was a movie that affects people, and I'm proud of it. And if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, I'd be like, well, I made that one really cool movie. Like, and all of the time that I spent during the time it took to do that was such unnecessary anxiety that I should have just been spending watching more movies on the Criterion channel instead of hating myself,
Also, I mean, this seems like kind of a perfect time to be talking about this, because I feel really bad for, I mean, you talk about how you spent, 8 years trying to get Daniel Isn't Real made. And I think about all of the film festivals that have been canceled recently because of, the coronavirus, and then all of these independent filmmakers and creatives that have been, toiling away for forever trying to get their movie made. And now a lot of their places where they're premiering it are no longer there. And it's so sad.
Oh yeah. No, it's such a bummer. I mean, I have a lot of friends who had things lined up for both South by or Tribeca. People who had been, who were like, I mean, I think back to 1 year ago, Daniel premiered at South by, and it was like a life-changing event. It's like, I mean, it's such a catastrophe to cancel things like that. I mean, I'm hoping that these movies will sort of rise to the top in the next wave of festivals after we get through this thing. And, we'll be seeing them at Toronto. We'll see them at Fantastic Fest and things like that. Like, I can only hope that they're just deferring the thing that gets to happen. It's not just completely crushed, but yeah, it's really sad. And on top, I have a friend who had something premiering at Tribeca and had just gotten a huge project greenlit that was a show he was going to run, and then it canceled because of the outbreak, at the same time, like in the same week that happened. We had talked with Bria Grant, and she had,
oh my God. Yeah.
She
was so excited about Lucky, and
her
two movies were going to premiere both at South by Southwest and then at Tribeca. And so it really kind of brings to light the importance of festivals, because everyone is just so devastated that their films aren't going to be able to premiere at these big things that, like you said, with Daniel Isn't Real, kind of shoot your film into a different trajectory depending on how received they are.
Yeah, and then, from South by, I was able, because of South by, I started to get invited to so many other fests. I had really made this commitment once it started happening that I was going to try to go to every possible festival I could get to, whether it took me to South Korea and Spain or South Florida. Like, I was just everywhere with it, which was amazing. And also sort of harkened back to my days of wanting to be a rock star, because it was really like being on tour with it. But, yeah. I mean, I think there's hopefully so many exhibition opportunities, and I think the community is going to take its time over the next couple of months to figure out how it's going to work. And I'm sure we'll be seeing movies like Lucky in the fall in the exact right kind of circumstance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Going back to Daniel Isn't Real for a moment. So in my review, when I was watching it, I kind of, and I don't know if this is because I come at things from a queer perspective, but I kind of was like interested in some of the homoeroticism underneath between the two characters. Was that intentional, or am I just reading that because?
No, I mean, I loved your perspective on it. I love what you wrote about it, and I think that you were uniquely situated to want to write about that, as were a lot of the younger women that wrote about the movie. And that that's all there. I mean, what was really important to me in the terms that you're describing is that I wanted to present the way that young men, the way that their friendships work at that age, which is something that I think is like kind of unexplored in films. Like, we have a lot of movies, buddy cops, we have like adult men who are like, brr, 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 those kind of movies. Right. I think we all know what I mean.
That genre of movie.
I think the fact that I am inarticulate of expressing it speaks to the inarticulateness of the characters, not of the movies. The movies are articulate in their understanding of the world, but these characters are like,
yep.
And we have a lot of movies about like boys, like the Stand By Me kind of, or E.T. or that kind of thing. But when I was in college, when I was, whatever age you are, 18, 19 years old, like, there is this like intensity with a friend that you will choose, and you're no longer like 14-year-olds who are like, what is a sexuality? Like, what is a world? You're just, I went to school in New York City, and you're just like just thrown into you're just in the world, but you have no rules because you're in college, and it's fucking crazy. And like, there's a closeness and an emotional intensity in two young men being friends that I think is so interesting and vibrant. And so that was an important part of kind of creating the vibe in the movie and the vibe around those characters. And and I wanted, to be clear to people who haven't seen the movie, it's like, I'm sort of having my cake and eating it too, because Daniel is both a non-human entity, imaginary friend thing, but I was very specific about shooting the movie like they are two best friends. Like, that's how it had to feel. And in thinking about what Daniel was, he had to be so charming and sexy, like you want to be him. It's like, do I want to be you or fuck you? I can't even tell the difference anymore. The emotions are so confusing and overwhelming. And already, and it's like, it's so funny when you're making a movie because everybody has to be so beautiful and charming. Like, I've already cast Miles Robbins. So now the guy who he wants to be, who has to be so much sexier than him, like, oh, fuck, like Miles is incredibly charming and sexy. But,
he is.
But Patrick is, has like a superhuman look. And when I was talking to my costume designer about what Daniel should be like, and really what everybody in the movie should be like, I told her, I want you to think about this, like, when people write about this movie, they will all assume that I'm gay because of the way that we're going to film these young men and like the intensity with which I want to just love them in the film. And then on top of that, there's a whole psychological thing that has to do with that Daniel is an expression of Luke's own self and his better self, and how do you relate in a, narcissistic or sexual way with your own self or your own self-idealization.
Wow.
That's wild. Because when I saw the movie, I kind of saw it as like this sexual tension between the two of them, but then I kept saying, but technically Daniel is Luke. Like, what does that mean? And then I got too deep into my own head and feelings.
Yeah.
To really come to an answer. But it is really fascinating to think about that, like, weird relationship to the self. And it's very complicated and very fascinating. And I hope one day I will have more articulate ways of talking about that.
But I think that is the labyrinth that I invite you to go on. It's not so simple. And so you can kind of just follow it through and so there's 2 sex scenes in the movie, and it was so important to me to have those sex scenes that that they don't like grind the movie to a halt. They in fact expose character and push the plot forward, and all kinds of things are happening, and each of those 2 characters is getting to express their sexuality in totally different ways, and then but also they're there. The other one is there in both cases. And the way that each of those characters relates to that fact is, so weird and interesting. And I think you can look, there's a scene where Luke, played by Miles, is having sex with Sasha Lane, and then the camera pans up and Daniel is just standing there on the edge of the bed watching them. And, I love that so much, and it's so weird, but it's also, I think it's also like the way we are, like we see ourselves. Like I think you are constantly third personing yourself and looking at yourself doing things in your weirdest or most vulnerable moments also. So it works in those different ways.
And so kind of moving from that, like talking about the 2 of them and the sexual tension, I was really drawn to this as a portrayal about mental illness. I think I interviewed you previously and talked about this, but like I was recently diagnosed with like rapid cycling bipolar disorder, and it was such like, I don't know how to put, like, what word to use, but like it was a movie where I saw that I felt very seen and very understood in terms of representing a mental illness where you feel like you're split. And I'm obviously... well, maybe not obviously, but Luke's mother in the film, she is mentally ill, and it seems like she has some kind of schizophrenia. And it's just like the way the film handles mental illness without it being exploitative or gross is just like really important to me, especially because bipolar disorder is so often portrayed as something very bad. And while there are moments of violence in this movie, it felt like the mental illness aspect was handled really well. And I just wanted to hear more from you about portraying mental illness on screen and like what you wanted to accomplish with this. I know that Daniel is technically an imaginary friend, but did you mean to really veer into this discussion of like mental illness, especially in young men?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, that's really beautiful for you to say all of that. And I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
I think that aspect of it was what I started to realize I was able to bring to the story, or, one of the things that, it was based on a novel originally, and then I was writing the script with Brian, who wrote the novel. And, when I was thinking about how are we turning this into a movie and what experiences am I able to base this on, and like, what truth can I bring to it? The one idea of this will be relatable to everybody because we all struggle with, I want to be a good person, but also there's impulses and voices telling me to do things that aren't good, and how do I balance that? That was like the most general idea, because I don't want to limit it to like you have to have an experience with mental illness to get the movie, right? So there's this like general sense of how we all struggle in our minds to be people, but then more specifically, I started to realize, when I was in college, when I was the age of these characters, my best friend, who I had been close to since we had gone to the same junior high, the same high school, and then the same college, he had a horrific bipolar meltdown, kind of schizophrenic break that sort of unfolded over months, and then resulted with me taking him to a mental hospital. And so I was trying to draw on those memories and try to understand what was that like, what was that about. And it's, that it's something you just asked me, Mary Beth, if it was about men specifically. And I mean, in the sense, it's like, what I learned was that these kind of experiences happen to men at a certain age and then women at a different certain age, right?
Yeah.
So there's a tendency that a bipolar break happens to men when they're like 19 or 20 and women when they're in their mid 20s.
Yeah.
And so I really started to realize, this story, like really, it fits a kind of general pattern. So where's my opportunity to like really derive the truth from that? And, there was one thing with my friend was that we just didn't understand that he had a problem. And this is something that I tried to get at in the movie also, is this sense that, especially when you are 18 years old, you and every single person around you, I think we talked about this probably before, Mary Beth, right? Like, that everybody is acting kind of crazy because you don't know what your identity is yet.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, maybe today I'll wear a lizard as a hat. Or, like tomorrow I'm going to tweet that I'm going to run for president. Like, who the fuck knows? It doesn't, you're trying it out. You're very liquid and fluid and you're trying to see what your identity is. But so there's no way to tell when somebody's identity has become, like lava instead of just liquid.
Yes.
And so, we're all acting like assholes. And if he happened to be acting just a little bit more like a weird asshole because he was making phone calls to Ludwig Wittgenstein, there was no way for us to tell until it got so bad and so far beyond saving that it was like, holy shit, like we're in this problem. And, you can hang out with somebody who's having a manic episode thinking that you're all kind of in this together, having an energetic, youthful experience. And then 3 days later, you're like, he hasn't slept and I'm trying to keep up with him. And like, I'm exhausted. Like, what the fuck is happening?
Yep.
And so that kind of exact feeling was what I wanted to capture in the movie. And the way that I was hoping, that it would avoid exploitation, as you say, is that if I stuck to the truth of it, if I was like, I really understand something about this experience and I don't want to turn away from it and I don't want to glamorize it, but I want to be true to it. Like, part of the truth of it is it's really exciting. Suddenly you are empowered. And the other part of it is that it's horrifying and you want it to stop. Like, all of the feelings of it, and trying to capture that with the color, with the kind of the texture and with the music that we were talking about, like getting at all of those feelings and hoping that it was true. I felt like, well, if I make it as true as possible, then if some people don't like it, it's funny. I found, going on the kind of film festival circuit, it was like every time I showed the movie, people would come up to me and say, I had an experience like this and this is really what it's like. I really feel seen. Every so often somebody would get really kind of nasty with me about it and challenge me and say, like, well, I don't know, mental illness, mental health, exploitation. But they would never say this was 100% of the time. They would always say, what would you say to somebody who thinks that the movie is exploitation? Or like, what would you say about, if the mental illness is not treated but they were not coming out themselves from their own experience and saying, like, I felt like the movie was personally offensive to me. They were like fishing for me to, I don't know, confirm that it was wrong. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's because but the people who really went through it or knew somebody that went through it were always kind of wrapped up in it. And I think that was an interesting, like, we're all very concerned about, are we seeing things represented that are wrong and that will be harmful? And I found that in this case, the truth of this kind of experience is so fucked up that you kind of just need to trust that the movie, hopefully I'm setting up the movie in a way where you're trusting that it's leading you into an experience that's honest.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
And I'd just like to piggyback on that real quick. It's just like the way you talked about where like you're doing something crazy and it feels really fun, but you also know it's fucked up. Like the way you have that portrayed with Luke and Daniel is a way I have felt before, where you're like, this is really cool and I feel awesome, but in the back of your head you're like, something is wrong and like I don't like where this is going, but you can't stop. And I think that was what really captured me because I've never really seen that on screen before. That feeling of like really fun, but also holy shit, like I'm scared and I'm not sure what's happening. And especially captured in such a personal way. So I just wanted to say thank you for doing that and providing me with an experience I did not know I needed at the time. So,
oh man, that's awesome. Yeah, I think that, you know, you're describing the anxiety we have about ourselves, and it can be true in a really extreme mental illness sort of situation, and it can also be true in daily life. Like you like I've sort of have such a structure of anxiety in my life that when things are going well, I'll tend to start to freak out quietly internally. Yeah. And be like, oh my God, something's going to happen. You know, like, oh, I just got this movie deal. I definitely have stomach cancer, you know, like and like I've been able to reduce that in the past few years because I really started to notice that was running my life. But for a long time, it was like hard to be happy in any one direction. And then you're sort of like, wait, am I unconsciously forcing myself to be miserable? Because every time things start to look up, I think something's going wrong.
That's exactly what I have. And I was diagnosed as OCD. So I wonder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I catastrophize too. It's awful. It ruins your life, man.
Yeah. I know. I mean, here are the things I do. I box regularly. I do yoga regularly. I meditate. I do therapy, and I take Lexapro, and I eat super healthy. Like I do all of these things, right? All of these things just to sort of have a fighting chance of not being my own worst enemy. Just so I can get to like what I imagine is like a baseline of like, oh, now I can, you know, sort of focus on what I'm doing.
Yeah. Amazing. I also take Lexapro.
I mean, I fought off medication for so long in my life, you know, and I remember when I went to see a psychiatrist and I gave her that laundry list of things I just said, minus the medication. I was like, I'm doing all these things, so I shouldn't need medication. I don't want medication. I already do yoga. And she was like, look, man, if you're doing all of the stuff you just described and you still feel that way, then that's what medication is for.
Yep.
And I was like, maybe life is too short to have to feel this way all the time. Let me see what this is all about.
Sorry, Terry.
No, I think this is an interesting and an important conversation to be having. And I think that, gosh, my thoughts are all over the place right now, but I think that's what's kind of cool about Daniel Isn't Real is that it's like art. You can come at it from many different angles and see different things and see different aspects of it. And I think that's ultimately what makes movies so interesting. But you are also working right now editing your next movie with SpectraVision, right? How is that going? It's Arch Enemy. It's a superhero movie of sorts?
Yeah, it's called Arch Enemy. It is a superhero movie of sorts. It's like a gritty crime science fiction psychotronic breakup movie.
Hell yeah.
with a superhero thing happening. It stars Joe Manganiello, who you may know from True Blood and Magic Mike. And he's essentially the sexiest man in the world. So what I'm trying to do is build up this body of work where people know, oh, it's an Adam E. Mortimer joint. There's going to be a really hot guy in this film. Like I just feel like
I love this.
It's good cinema, right? So
it is.
So Joe plays a man who's broken, alcoholic. He lives in a tent under a bridge. And he claims that he is a superhero from another dimension who used to have all these superpowers and saved the world, but then he crash landed here when he fell through a black hole, and he doesn't have any powers and he doesn't have anything. And then he gets involved with this kind of low level crime story with this brother and sister that he meets, and it sort of combines, I don't know, brutal violence with cosmic pondering and
cool.
A lot of brokenheartedness. So yeah, we shot that already, and I'm in the midst of editing.
Cool. That's amazing.
And it's going well. It's a funny thing. It was way less budget than Daniel was, and so it was a really hard shoot. It was the hardest shoot I've done because we had such few days, and it's so ambitious. And I think there was even a moment when I was like, wait, I don't need to do this movie. I should wait and do this movie some other time when we can get more money and do it right. And then I thought, wait a minute, man, like I just spent decades begging the universe to let me make a movie. If suddenly I have the opportunity, I'll just say yes, no matter what, no matter how horrific it's going to turn out to be. So, so I did. So that's the side of it I fell on.
Awesome.
That's awesome. Is that going to be hitting festival circuits, or is there a release plan, do you think, for that?
Yeah, I hope so. It will we'll probably be done with it by the end of the summer. And so, I mean, I don't know. I can't say, I have no idea where it will. I mean, I really don't know what will happen to it, but it will be, I think it will almost certainly be able to be seen by some people later this year.
I can't wait.
That is my commitment. That is my very specific commitment to you.
And it's on record, so
I know. There's no backing out of that level of promise.
So, Terry, what have you been watching lately?
So before when we were scheduling this, I thought I was going to have a couple movies to talk about because I was planning on covering Boston Underground Film Festival, but Corona didn't happen. It really sucks. I feel so bad for people.
I know. I was supposed to cover it too. I'm so sad. And for Kayla. Yeah. Kayla, if you're listening, we love you. I'm so sorry you've had such a stressful time as a PR person.
But I'll cover this very briefly so we can get to the movie because I'm really excited about it.
Yeah.
So the movie that I actually just finished watching before we started recording is called The Platform.
Oh, fuck. I wanted to see that at TIFF, but then I didn't go because I fell asleep because it was at midnight. Is it good?
It is disturbing as fuck.
Hell yeah.
I loved it. When this is airing, you'll be able to watch it because it's hitting Netflix
okay.
on the 20th. So it'll be out.
The 20th. Hell yes. Oh, I'm so
this
excited.
Friday, the Friday we're recording.
Yeah.
A couple days ago when this airs. But it's basically, it takes place in this, they call it the pit or the hole, and it's this very long vertical tower with floors, and each floor is a cell with two people in it, and there's like a giant hole in the floor and in the ceiling that just keeps going up and up. It's seemingly endless. They don't know how many levels there are, but people have been to like level 200, and it's sort of like this kind of purgatory place where this platform will come down from the ceiling and will have food on it, or at least you hope it will have food on it, because it depends on how far down you are in this level, because the people above you will eat and they'll be gluttonous and they won't care about the people below, because at one point they were below. And then randomly within 30 days, the levels switch. And so you could be at the top of the pyramid, and then at the last thing you're at the bottom, and there's no food coming down to you because everyone else has eaten it.
Oh God. And
it's just, I feel like it'd be a really good companion piece to like to Parasite.
Okay, that's what I've heard.
It's definitely in the same vein as that. I don't think it's as clever or as smart maybe as Parasite is, but it is a depressing movie about mankind's base instincts for preservation of themselves without thinking of the people that are below them. Wow. When they themselves have been in that position before. And it's a very dark movie, but really, really good. Like I'm still just trying to parse my thoughts about it, but it'll be out there. You guys should go watch it on Netflix.
Cool.
Really, really dug it. What about you, Mary Beth?
So I caught up on Kingdom.
Hell yeah.
I haven't finished season 2, but I caught up on season 1. Kingdom, for everyone who doesn't know, it's the zombie Netflix show, which is from a Korean zombie Netflix show. It's a period piece, so it takes place,
the Joseon?
Yeah, but it takes place period? Like in like in the far past of Korea, but like it's a beautiful period piece, and it's creepy and really well acted. It's amazing. So, we're stuck inside for the next couple of weeks. Add that to your list. I also watched this film from 2018 called Aniara. It's a Swedish film that is very depressing and about capitalism. And boy, oh boy, I watched it yesterday and, was not the right time to watch that movie. It's just like very much about people being stuck in one place and the darker sides of humanity coming out. Not in like horrifically violent ways, but more just like these very sad ways.
Yeah.
It's really good. I mean, like, it's on Hulu. It's beautiful. Okay. It's like one of those sci-fi movies that is like, you sometimes forget it's a sci-fi movie because it's just like, it's like one of those, like, I guess, I don't know how you would describe it. It's like very emotional and very much about like contemplating your place in the universe more than trying to make it about the spectacle of space.
That's my kind of sci-fi. It's a sci-fi I like. I'm looking at it right now on IMDb.
I mean, like, it's a movie that will put you in a very weird headspace, but it's really beautiful. Okay. So my brand of movie, really beautiful, but is fucked up. But yeah, so that's what I've been watching. Adam, what have you been watching?
So there's a couple things. One is the French horror show Marianne that's on Netflix.
Yes.
Have you guys seen it?
Yes. I have not finished it, but I have watched part of it.
It's so scary. Like, I was really impressed by how scary it was. I think, like, I love that we're in this era of horror series, and often they're not scary. Like, I love American Horror Story because it's just campy and crazy, but it's not like scary.
Yeah.
Right.
Channel Zero was terrifying, and Marianne I felt like was just so unnerving. It was like as scary as you can get, and it had such a sense of like, ugh. So I really recommend that. I'm super into witches, and it just totally delivers on witch terror.
Yeah.
And I also was fortunate enough before pandemic quarantine that I got to see The Hunt.
Oh, I have heard such like divisive things about The Hunt.
It is so good. Like, I loved it. Like, I was like shrieking with glee. I mean, there is so I had no idea there would be that much like heads exploding and bodies ripped apart, but like constantly every, like, so surprising, like every moment it was a shock. You don't even know who the main character is. You don't know what the fuck is going on. It's hilarious. And it's kind of like a South Park episode in the way that it is kind of making fun of everybody. It's like the sort of leftist woke people you despise them. Glenn Howerton plays this amazing version of that character. The people who, like, everybody, every aspect of culture gets equally kind of shot in the head, and it's so much fun. And then the real treasure, the real surprise of it is that Betty Gilpin is just such a good actress. Like, I've never, like, she is in this movie, she is on the level of Nicolas Cage. Like, she is doing choices that are so strange and so specific and so engaging. I was like, this is going to make her a superstar. And I hope that, I mean, I think that Universal just announced today that they're going to be releasing this movie. Is this one of the movies that they're releasing?
It's the
right?
Hunt, There's The Hunt and The Invisible Man, among others. They're
and Emma.
Emma, and then Trolls or something. A movie that I'm probably never going to watch.
Yeah. I mean, if it wasn't quarantine season, I would say, invite all your friends over, pay the $20 and watch The Hunt. But if it wasn't quarantine season, you wouldn't be able to do that. So it's all very confusing, but it's an awesome movie.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna try to watch that this weekend with the little VOD that they're doing. I think it's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
cool.
So too.
Yeah. I'm sure you will dig it. And
cool.
And last thing, I just read a tiny little book that I want to shout out, which is it's a short story. I think it's just like 80 some pages, but it comes in a cute little hardcover book. It's called This Is Pleasure by Mary Gateskill. I don't know if you know Mary Gateskill. She's a brilliant short story and novel writer. She wrote the short story that the movie Secretary was based on. So all of her stories, like since the kind of mid or late 80s, are about these very intense, layered relationship, sexual, unhinged, subtle, but also horrific. And she's such a beautiful writer. And this new story that she wrote is about it's her take on Me Too. It's about a very fancy literary publisher who has launched the careers of all of these brilliant women, but then he is also like accused of all of these horrific things, and it alternates between being told the story is told by him as the narrator and by a woman who has been friends with him for years, and it's like the most subtle, strange unlayering of this contemporary moment that I've ever read. And so I really recommend it for people who want like a deep kind of emotional, intellectual dive into the layers of that kind of thing.
Hell yeah. Okay. That sounds like just the kind of thing I like to read. Cool.
Yeah, I'm going to add that to my list right now.
Yeah.
Cool.
So now that we've talked about what we've been watching, let's talk about the movie that you've brought with you today, Adam. What are we discussing?
We are discussing Pink Floyd, The Wall.
Very
which
exciting.
is a 1982 movie.
Is there anybody out there?
The memories. The madness. The music. The movie. The Wall.
All in all, you're just another brick in the wall. The wall.
So before we start discussing it, I'll just read a quick synopsis for those who are not familiar with Pink Floyd's The Wall. So in this visual riff of Pink Floyd's album, The Wall, like I said, successful but drugged out musician Pink is looking back on his isolated childhood from the confines of an LA hotel room. Through a swirl of flashbacks and chemical-induced hallucinations, Pink recalls his lonely upbringing, during which he built a symbolic wall to the world as he coped with the death of his father and the overbearing ways of his mother. So this is quite a relevant film to watch now, huh?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things that are super relevant. One of which is that it's a guy sitting in his living room losing his mind, so we can all relate to that right now.
I know. I read the synopsis on Letterboxd, and it was about, I said it losing his mind during social isolation, and I was like, fuck. Uh-oh.
What's interesting to me about that synopsis that you just read is that it uses all of these words that sound so passive, like he's recalling and he's this and that. And nothing about that synopsis suggests the reality that this movie will fuck you up so badly.
Okay.
And like every scene of this movie is like just like a soul tearing, assault. And right? I mean, they should just say that on the synopsis. It doesn't matter what it's about. It will fuck you up badly. And that's it. Okay. The mic drop.
That's it. We're done. The interview's over. Goodbye. Yep. So how old were you when you first saw this? And like, what was the context of you first seeing this movie?
So I didn't see this when I was like a tiny, tiny child. I saw this when I was probably like 11 years old or something like that. Okay. And I had already been exposed to Pink Floyd. I really liked their music. Mm-hmm. And I think, it's interesting. I think that I originally inherited a number of Pink Floyd records from a very close uncle who committed suicide. Oh, wow. And then I wound up with all of these records of his that I grew to love. So there's like sort of already like kind of a disturbing connection there, or a complex connection. But I was really obsessed with the band, and then and knew that there was this movie, and it had this kind of mystical or mythical, like, what is this movie? What is it? What happens when you watch this movie? And then I watched it on VHS when my mother and I were staying at a friend of hers house in the country, kind of in Amherst, Massachusetts. And I remember I watched it by myself. I remember watching it by myself. And then I remember very distinctly later in the day, or even the next day, my mom was looking at me and she was like, "Is something wrong? Like, are you sick? Like, what's happening?" And I was like, I that movie, like I couldn't articulate it, and and there was no language I could, and this is coming, I had said earlier, there was some other, Watership Down, American Werewolf in London, like these movies had sort of set a baseline of a certain kind of like nightmare inducing, but this movie made me feel nauseous and hopeless in a way that I have never experienced before or after. And in a funny way, I mean, it's one of my favorite movies of all time. And I hate how it makes me feel, but I am so in awe of its ability to make me feel that way.
Yeah, that's a way to describe it. So was there a scene, like, in particular, or like multiple scenes that like particularly upset you, scarred you, made you feel nauseous?
It's funny. I think that first watching of it, because obviously, you know, it's very it's so nonlinear and so symbolic, and you can kind of, you can walk away from, you can have a feeling, but from the movie that's very strong, and also you kind of wonder, well, what is the wall? What does that ending mean? What does it mean that they tear down the wall? What is this about? And so I was trying to wrap my head around that kind of stuff when I was a kid, and I just found it like, I mean, it was so overwhelming. I mean, when I think back of me watching it, it just, all I can think about is the scene in Clockwork Orange when he's got his eyeballs held open and just staring at imagery. It's like, I couldn't comprehend any of it. Like, I'd never been in a relationship, let alone a sexual relationship. So I had no idea what this is even about. I think the imagery of the mother when she's at her most sort of surreal and animated, and she's just this like giant breasty thing squeezing the tiny baby. Like, I think that at that time that really fucked with me, and like the flower animation.
Yes,
but it's also
the flower animation.
The flower animation is, you know, I was listening to the cartoonist Gerald Scarfe talk about that, and each one of those pictures took him days to draw. Like, in the animation, like every one of the 12 pictures a second was like drawn with crayon and pencil and shaded. And it's, you know, it's just this horrific thing that encapsulates a toxic relationship through flowers interacting and transforming in this violent, sexual, beautiful, horrific. I mean, just in like a minute and a half, he captures like a lifetime of toxic relationship feelings. It's so weird because this is the second time in 2 weeks that we've had genital looking flowers, because we just talked about last week Little Shop of Horrors, and I made a comment that plant looks like a penis when it's a baby, and now we literally have this penis and this vagina plant that are like fighting. There's like penetration. It's like erotic and terrifying. And in my notes, the thing I wrote was like, straight sex is scary, because it looks absolutely terrifying. Yeah. Oh, it's definitely, I mean, I think that's, you know, kind of the core of the movie is that, you know, it's like, it's so nonlinear, but there's all of the thing that makes it so wonderful is the interconnection from one image to the other that is talking about how scary being vulnerable, being in a love or sexual relationship, like how that kind of experience can make you the most miserable, but if you're not prepared for it, you know, and so there's this, I mean, this is why I love this movie so much, is that it will have these moments where, you know, I think if you watch the movie casually, you're like, I don't know, it seems like a collection of images, but I love it. Like, my thing with this movie is like, I want people to talk about it more as a movie than as a progressive rock band's project. You know what I mean? Because cinematically it's so powerful. So there will be scenes when it's like he is looking out the window as a little kid and seeing his first naked woman, and then it cuts to his wife in bed looking at him in the same eye line, but he's not looking at her, and it's like you know, it's like you're tracing like a psychological map of his. And then, you know, there's a scene where he's at this horrific, awkward middle school prom, and he sees this really tall girl across the way, and he looks at her, and then it intercuts with his wife, who's now in a different city, looking at a man that she's about to have an affair with, and then he's dancing. The little kid is dancing with the girl, and the wife is having sex with the man. It's like, and of course the scene where he's being sort of held by his mother, and then it's intercut with him getting married, and you're like, oh my God, like every experience that this person has had around women are all like the same, like he's having the same emotional response to everybody, and he can't escape from that. Like, of course, he's so broken, and all of these relationships are toxic because he hasn't solved what to do. And I think the movie in all of the themes that it's about, it's always doing things like that, where you're sort of chasing somebody's psychological map in a way that I think is so painful. That's part of what gives it this like heaviness that I couldn't comprehend as a kid, but I could feel.
Yeah. The thing is that this is the first time I saw the movie. And I watched it. I ended up watching it twice because the first time I was like, I don't really get what is going on. It was like an assault. You describing it as like the Clockwork Orange scene is like how it felt when I first watched this movie. Cause I'm like, I don't know what is going on. I just know that it's making me feel all sorts of different things. And so I ended up watching it again, tonight when I got off work. And I was like, okay, I'm seeing all of the like cinematic aspect of it because I'll be honest. I remember seeing this as a VHS as a kid in like, the Blockbuster, the, local movie stores. And like, it was never in the horror section, but the cover was terrifying. Like it's a freaky ass cover, but like I was like, that's just a music. That's just like a music video is what I anticipated it as a kid. And so like I've never sought it out, and I was so happy to finally watch it because there's a lot going on in this, not only from a music perspective, but also from like you were talking about a cinematic. The second time I watched it, I saw all these crossfades and like going to one of the most effective for me was the another brick in the wall moment where it's like the kids are on a conveyor belt. And then by the time they go through this change, they're tied to their desk and they're wearing this like faceless mask that like you can kind of still see their eyes underneath it as like they look horrified, but like their facial expressions is just blank. And I was like, oh, there's some really interesting things going on here. And then like when he's imagining them rebelling, again, we get the crossfades with like the rebellion of the kids, but also protests and the war scenes. And there's all of this like stuff kind of coming together in a very, very cinematic way.
Yeah, I find that super fascinating. Like that moment you're talking about when it's like they're the little kids throwing things and breaking windows and lighting the school on fire, and then the rock fans kind of overwhelming the stadium and getting busted by the cops, and then the fascist, sort of army rising up and causing a riot. And my sensibility when watching that, when watching the way they're interconnected, is it's like those are the same people. Like these kids in their school are having the poetry, and selfhood stripped away from them by a system that wants to exert a kind of fascism. So the only thing they can do then is freak out, and the only thing that's available to them later when they become adults is to freak out. And it's like, I think that's what the movie is about. The evolving like cycle of violence and abuse. Like the teacher is abusive to him, and so he's going to grow up to become a nightmare,
right.
and maybe the teacher is a nightmare because of his relationship to World War II, and it goes on and on and on, backwards and forwards in time simultaneously.
Yeah, we've talked a lot on this podcast about generational trauma, and that is definitely an aspect of this movie that I saw continually played out through all the flashbacks of him as a kid dealing with like trying to be a poet, and his teacher is saying, the lad reckons himself a poet. Absolute rubbish. Get on with your work. And so it's like, it's this stripping, like you said, of their kind of like personality and just focusing them on work and being mindless pawns in some kind of like corporate machine that will ultimately grind them up and spit them out, and then I guess feed them to other kids, because like there's the idea of like, if you don't eat your meat, you can't have any pudding, and then we see that the kids are being turned into meat.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, that's such an interesting connection.
It's so weird. But what do you think about it, Mary Beth? What was your thoughts watching this right now?
So I grew up with Pink Floyd. My stepdad was a drummer, and he would play along to their music quite often. I had a lot of very vivid memories of my stepdad blasting this album and playing drums along with it, and being very annoyed and not appreciating the musical education I was receiving as a child. And I also had a connection to it because my stepdad's brother, Butch, who I call my uncle because he was basically my uncle, died of a heroin overdose, and he really loved Pink Floyd, and we would listen to a lot of Pink Floyd after his death. So, like, I have a lot of, like, very intense emotional connections to Pink Floyd, but I never saw The Wall, I think because I had, like, so many connections to to the actual music. And also, I think I had seen clips, especially of the animated flower. I had that, like, I'd never seen this movie before, but that sequence was somehow in my head, and I don't know how, but again, one of those things where, like, I think I probably seen it online or something. And so this is my first time seeing it, and it was a lot, especially for this current moment about, like, social isolation and kind of like going down a rabbit hole when you're stuck alone, which is unfortunately rather relevant to our current moment. But I also was so impressed with the seamless transition between live action and animation and back out.
Yes.
I love animation. I think horror, well, I know this isn't necessarily a horror movie, but like horrific animation I think is so important in terms of being a place to experiment with form and experiment with terror and experiment with like what horror can look like in different forms. And so those moments were so striking to me. And especially the way they like, there was a moment I think where it was like a hammer was something transformed into a hammer, and then the hammer smashed into the glass, and it became like the kids looting the front of the store.
Stuff. Yeah,
and that scene really stuck out to me, just in the way that this movie, like ahead of its time, was seamlessly integrating these different mediums to create this intense cinematic experiment and experience that is gorgeous. And again, like, it shouldn't just be thought of as like a visual album or music videos. Like, it really is an experimental cinematic experience that really is quite moving.
Yeah.
That's my rant about the whole.
Yeah, it's funny, you know, I as I've seen it over the years, I've connected it like visually to other things that I love and other things that that feel like it has a similar vibe. Like, you know, there's the scene where they put he puts a bullet down on the train tracks, and he's in this tunnel, and of course the tunnel looks like a brick wall, and it's this like sort of terrifying place, and he's waiting to see what will happen if the train runs over the bullet. And then when the train goes by, it's like hands are coming out of it, and it's horrific faces. Mm-hmm. And it reminds me so much of the scene in Jacob's Ladder.
Yes.
When he sees the train go by. And, you know, Jacob's Ladder is probably one of the most important movies to me in my life. Also a movie that I think beautifully depicts what trauma feels like.
Yeah.
And what I realized only recently, which I hadn't known, is that it's the same cinematographer. Peter Bijou was the cinematographer of The Wall and 9.5 Weeks and Time Bandits. So like all of these movies that are from this like 80s, this period of like 80s, you know, kind of like darkness and surrealism and like disturbing dramas, he was there shooting them. And not the cinematographer, the production designer. It was the same production designer as Jacob's Ladder, as well as Angel Heart and The Hunger, and it was the same cinematographer as Time Bandits. It's like this group of British artists who were inventing this like language that took us so intensely out of the 70s, the kind of washed out 70s Altman, you know, zoom lenses, and into this like super strong, everything is like backlit, and we're in this like elevated worlds. And it's like, I hadn't realized until going back to it how much like the artists kind of teaming up to make this movie were responsible for so much of that stuff.
Yeah, and it's weird because it's funny to me because I posted on Twitter because it's hard to find this movie to stream.
Yeah.
And so like I found it streaming somewhere, and I'm like I watched the beginning part of it, and I'm like, this doesn't look like it was made in 1982. And that's why I tweeted out, I was like, is this the right movie? Because like I didn't want to watch the wrong one, because it looks so ahead of its time. Like it opens up with the very like in the like the hotel room, the hotel lobby, and it's like so stark and so clinical and so clean, and I'm like, it really hit me as like, I don't think this was made in 1982. And I just kept thinking that as I was watching the movie. It's so ahead of its time. And it makes sense that it shares like the production designers and cinematographers from these other movies that are making such surreal and ahead of their time cinema. It's crazy to think about that.
That opening the opening in the hotel and the kind of the whole first 5 minutes of this movie, I think, are like really you can really study like some brilliant cinematic language in the first few minutes, because it starts when you're going through this hallway in the hotel, which is essentially, that's like the present. That's what the movie is, right? He's in this hotel. He's undergoing this experience as memories. So you're starting there in the present. It immediately cuts to his father when his father was alive in World War II getting killed, which is like the ultimate past. That's the furthest back the story goes. Like, he's a baby, Pink is a baby, and his father dies. And then it goes to, you know, as the song kicks in, you see him in his like fascist leader form on the stage singing a song that will be reprised at the end. So it's showing, like, in the first 5 minutes, it's shown you the very origin of his psychotrauma, where he is now and where he's headed as the ultimate tragedy.
Yeah.
And then it's like the whole movie now is going to connect the dots. Well, how do we go from this dead World War II soldier to this fascist leader? Let's take a look through the crazy psychogeography of this man and find out. And I think it's just like so beautiful how it encapsulates that in a way that at first might feel so arbitrary and shaken up. And then you realize kind of, you know, that it's showing you the entire life story in this moment.
Yeah, it's like a conglomeration of like the past, present, and future. With and the first time I watched the movie, I totally didn't pick up on any of this, and I literally felt like I was being assaulted with like a video and audio cacophony. But like looking back on it and then being able to like separate myself and watching it again, I love how this opening bit is basically a thesis for the rest of the movie. And I wrote it down in my notes about how this kind of feels relevant to today's online culture in some ways, about how demagogues are like built by isolating themselves. And because he built this wall based off of all of the like horrors of his past, his father and his relationship with women and his mom and school, and he builds himself up in this self-isolation, and then he doesn't really have an outlet, and then he becomes the thing that he hates. And it seems like it has a lot to say about the current demagogues that we seem to have.
Oh my God, yeah,
running around.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, the irony that his father died fighting Nazis,
Right.
and he becomes a Nazi. You know, like the trauma produces its own effect.
Yeah.
Oh God.
So the other animation that really stuck out to me, though, kind of piggybacking off that, is when I love how they talk about how Pink's mom she won't let you fly, but she might let you sing. So it gives this idea of like this caged bird. Like I know why the caged bird sings, like that kind of aspect to it. And then it transitions into this dove animation where you see like the dove floating out. And I was like, oh, it explodes. And there's the kind of Nazi bird that's like tearing the flesh out of the land where it like literally bleeds.
Oh, I was just going to say that's the very fascinating part.
Yeah. But like what I loved about that is that the bird eventually crashes, but its structure is left behind. So it kind of is saying that like, while the war might be over, the foundation that's like plaguing the land is still there, because it literally is this figure that has become this monolith on the ground. And I thought that the idea of like the UK flag kind of like breaking away until it was nothing but a bloodied cross, and then the whole place is filled with these crosses. It's just there's so much striking imagery going on in this.
Yeah, I think I was like very taken by like how much was being done in this, and I got a little bit overwhelmed. I was like, holy shit. Like, I don't think I understood how political the wall was until I watched. Like, I thought it was much more personal rather than political, if that makes sense.
I mean, I think what makes it so beautiful is that it's both. That it's about both like one individual's like psychological substructure turning him into a fascist or turning him into kind of a monster, and also about society going in that direction, like at the same time in the same story, as a result of like he was traumatized because his one individual father died, but all of England, all of those people from that generation were so terribly traumatized by having come from that landscape. And that, I mean, you know, I totally agree with you about the bird. Like you know, there's this moment of respite. You're like, oh, a bird. Oh, thank God. And then it becomes horrible. And there's all these other, you know, there's that other animation where it's like, it's like, it goes from like a face is maggots, but then it becomes like a woman, a beautiful woman who turns into a ice cream sundae. And then it becomes a hypodermic needle that's bleeding. And it's like, I think that I find so much, I have such a relationship to what that feels like in terms of, if you have something traumatizing in your psychological structure that you haven't resolved, everything that's pleasurable will turn to death in your perspective of it. Like an ice cream sundae will suddenly look like a syringe full of blood, or it's heroin, whatever the fuck that's even supposed to be.
Yeah.
Like death, like a beautiful dove. It was still it was flying because a cat was trying to eat it, and then it transforms into a Nazi warplane. It's like like this character is so damaged that that nothing can be quiet. Like he can't have a moment of quiet where something is nice. It's only ever turning to death. And I relate to that. And I feel like what the movie is really challenging us to say, like, okay, how do you get out of this? You know, like he's in so much pain that the only way he can numb himself to his agony is to become a fascist leader that beats and kills people. Like he has to inflict his personal pain. He couldn't figure out how to just get through it. He couldn't just go to therapy. He has to like destroy everybody. That's the only way he can feel better.
Yeah.
And I think that is, Mary Beth, when you're talking about like, you know, where we are today, it's like, I think that's such a crucial understanding that like this drive of nihilism and fascism comes from generational trauma, abuse, like tiny things. I mean, there's this moment constantly throughout the movie. They're showing he's in a rugby field, right? There's this thing he's running. There's a rugby field, or maybe it's a soccer field. It's like this recurring image where he's like in silhouette and he's running to you, and you're like, why is this so important to the movie? And then I felt like the denouement of the movie is when you realize, oh, he was running through the field and he finds that rat. He finds this like diseased rat that he tries to nurse back to health, and he puts it in a box, but then it dies. Yeah. And it makes him sick. And I was like, I think you could break down my synopsis of this movie would be a young boy tries to save a dying rat. The first thing he's ever loved, and he fails to save it and it dies. So he becomes a fascist leader. Huh. Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, you know, like his sort of like attempt at empathy is such a failure. it's so horrific. And then it's just this like straight line from a failed relationship with a rat all the way to like, let's murder everybody.
You know.
Yeah.
The progression of things.
As you do.
I mean, yeah.
So, final verdict on the wall. This is our new segment. This is our new segment, listeners. We're going to give a final verdict on each film.
So, Mary Beth, how many genital plants out of 5 do we give Pink Floyd The Wall?
I will give it a 4.5 plants out of 5.
And do you think? What do you think about it now? I guess you didn't see it as a kid, but like now is.
I'm glad I didn't see it as a kid. I think a lot of the imagery and the importance would have been lost on me, and I only would have focused on the horrific. I think it is a surprising, like it is a way ahead of its time piece of cinema that is really relevant to now, and I think people would benefit from watching it if they can find it. It is on Vimeo if you want to watch it. And I think it has a lot to say about toxic masculinity and mental illness and the need to address it and the need for empathy and the struggle for empathy. Those are my final thoughts. Terry, what about you?
You know, the first time I mean, because I watched it twice in 2 days, and the first time I probably
what an experience, by the way.
I probably would have given it like 3.5 genital plants out of 5, but the second time it's 5. Once I understood what it's trying to do, I think it's a brilliant piece of cinema, and it's a shame that the only streaming copy that I could find was a really bad low definition copy. I really think this would be ripe for some kind of collector's edition Blu-ray. But yeah, that's my thoughts. What about you, Adam? You have the final word. What's your rating, and do you have any final thoughts on The Wall?
Yeah, first of all, I agree. It's a crime that there's no Blu-ray. I bought a DVD special edition of it just to watch for this, so we could talk about it. Mm-hmm. It's funny because I had seen it obviously a couple times when I was a lot younger, and then I hadn't seen it for a while, but I always knew that I loved it, and then I always knew that it fucked me up. It was the first movie I watched after I finished shooting Daniel Isn't Real. I came back from New York. Oh, wow. And it was playing at the Aero Theater in LA, and I had never seen it on a big screen. And so I came back and watched it, and it's like, I mean, I loved it even more than ever, having been through the process of really trying to make a movie with psychological connections and everything. Seeing, I think I really got it that time. And I also realized how much I'd ripped it off without, there's so much stuff at the end of Daniel where he's like, there's kind of a cosmic brick wall at the end of a doorway and he's trying to smash through it. And, I was like, oh yeah, I stole that. And the way that sort of like past childhood witnessing of death and horrors comes back to get you and it's in your head. And so I think that I would have to fly my Nazi warplane all the way into the flower vagina and give it 5 out of 5.
I love that. That's awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Adam, for joining us to talk about Pink Floyd The Wall and introducing us to it. It was quite an experience. Where can our listeners find you, and what do you have coming up?
So I'm on Twitter at Adam Egypt, and I love talking to people there. Like I've really tried to be helpful as a filmmaker who can offer advice or words of comfort or share what my process is. So I invite people to find me there and try to have that kind of conversation with me. And I'm finishing this movie Arch Enemy, and that'll hopefully be out sometime around October. And I've just started working on another movie, and my creature designer sent me some insane sculpts today of some new creatures. So hopefully I can get the next movie going soon. Also, once we get out of the quarantine, which I'm sure we will for the most part get through.
I hope so.
Like that positive thinking.
So also Daniel Isn't Real is hitting Shudder on March 26th, and the folks at Shudder are so cool that they have given us a code that you can use to get a 14-day free trial. So if you use the promo code SCARRED, all caps, that would be SCARRED, you can get 14 days free to watch Shudder, and you can watch Daniel Isn't Real and also Adam's first feature, Some Kind of Hate, which is, I don't know if it's premiering, if it will be already on there or if it's premiering the same date as Daniel Isn't Real, but I think it is.
Yeah, I think it's the same day, and it hasn't been streaming for a long time. So yeah. I love Shudder, and I love what they do. They're such a great group of people.
Yes, they're wonderful. But yes, Scarred promo code, and we'll put that in the show notes. But yeah, go watch this movie.
Yes, please watch this movie. So you've heard from us listeners, but we want to hear from you. What was your experience with The Wall? Send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com or reach out to us directly on Twitter at scarredpodcast. You can also follow us on Twitter, the both of us on Twitter. I am at MB McAndrews.
And I'm at Gaily Dreadful.
Like I said, make sure to follow the show's podcast on Twitter as well.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you to Steve Barnold for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Stay safe, everyone. And more importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is the briefing room?
It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.